This video is a little bit different from the videos I typically post on my YouTube. So I made this video for two reasons. One, because I've noticed interpreters tend to interpret terms incorrectly. And by incorrectly, I mean they either tend to use lower register terms than what the provider uses higher register terms than what the patient uses, or will use a very generalized term to refer to something specific, or use a very specific term to refer to something generalized. So these are all very common mistakes. Secondly, every week on my Patreon, I post additional study materials, and these study materials really touch on some terminology and why I choose certain terminology and why that terminology should be interpreted that way. Because interpreting requires your full attention. This script, Mr. Rosales' diabetic consult, is actually a pretty simple script, but I break it down because you can't assume that because an utterance is simple that it doesn't require your undivided thought and attention. You would think that if I was analyzing the vocabulary, which is very simple vocabulary used in this script, that I wouldn't have a lot to say, but I do. It's a good idea to go back to the drawing board and really assess your skills and make sure you're interpreting everything accurately and completely. The first thing that I discuss on my patron exclusive post for the term set involved with Mr. Rosales' diabetic consult, I talk about pill versus tablet versus medication versus medicine. This script uses, I believe, the words pill and medication. Well, you can't say medication for pill and you can't say pill for medication because a medication can be an injection and a pill is a pill. And if the doctor says medication, you interpret it as medicamento. But if the doctor says medicine, you interpret it as medicina. It's very important. If you say you need to take this pill 3 times a day, if that is what the doctor says, you interpret you need to take this pill 3 times a day. If you use tablet, that might get a little confusing. And it might give the patient the wrong idea, especially if they're taking 3 different medications a day and one of them is a tablet and one of them is a pill. This script also touches on blood sugar versus blood glucose. I've heard many interpreters interpret blood glucose as blood sugar, thinking, oh, well, the patient doesn't understand blood glucose, so I'm going to go ahead and interpret it as blood sugar. If the provider says blood glucose, it is your responsibility to interpret it as blood glucose. Then, if the patient doesn't understand, they can say, ¿Cómo? Then you interpret, what? Huh? And then it's the provider's responsibility to explain. But of course, these are two different registers. You have the lower register of blood sugar, the higher register of blood glucose. If a patient is using blood glucose, you interpret it as blood glucose. And then that will probably give the provider a pretty good idea that the patient has a little bit higher health literacy. Whereas if you interpret blood sugar, hey, it could very well be that they already have a high health literacy. It's just that, hey, they're just more comfortable with using blood sugar. But this, in combination with other linguistic factors, can paint a picture for the provider as to what the patient's literacy and their health literacy is, whether you're using high register or low register terms. I chose this picture because this baby was just so cute. Baby aspirin. So are baby aspirin and low dose aspirin the same thing? Well, yeah. Because baby aspirin, the reason why it's called that is because before we knew about the effect that anti-inflammatories have on children, people used to give their infants aspirin. But now we know that it can cause a syndrome called Reyes syndrome, so we don't really give our children those medications anymore. So when you go to the pharmacy to try and find quote-unquote baby aspirin, you're really looking for low-dose aspirin. You're not going to find it in the infant pain relief section. Another thing that I go into in this post is about blueberries versus cranberries. So I am actually allergic to blueberries, which is why it's very important for me to differentiate in Spanish between blueberries and cranberries. Well, blueberries and cranberries, many people say arándanos. for both. So that is why whenever I interpret blueberries, I say arándanos azules. Cranberries, arándanos rojos. Though there are some people who interpret blueberries as moras azules. That's correct as well, but it's very important just to be absolutely specific and make sure there is no ambiguity in what you said. I would recommend adding the color qualifier to the end. In this particular script, the provider leaves the room for a monofilament. Doesn't really explain what it is. So I explain in this post about the terminology used in this video. I not only explain how to interpret monofilament, but also what a monofilament is and what it is used for. I provide some extra resources for that. So whether you're a seasoned interpreter or someone just starting out, I have my Patreon. And on my Patreon, in order to get access to these Spanish-English study materials and these term breakdowns, you would have to subscribe to my Spanish basic tier. You also gain access to this on my Spanish Premium and VIP tiers. On the Spanish Premium and VIP tiers, you also have access to exclusive English to Spanish script videos. So those would be those consecutive interpreting practice videos. Be sure to subscribe to my Patreon today and also subscribe to my YouTube, because if I release any free videos like this video today, which I hope you find it useful, I will be posting it here to my YouTube. And the only way to know is if you subscribe.